Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Lisbon. Welcome to Portugal. It's always a pleasure to have this kind of events here in the Universidade Autonoma de Lisboa. My name is Luís Bernardino. I'm professor at the Department of International Relations, and I'm going to be the moderator for this second panel of the afternoon. I think colleagues are now almost finishing these technical issues. What I'm going to propose, we're going to talk about economics, okay? So it's always a very hot topics. And we're going to follow this, if ladies don't mind, I'm going to start with Stefano. I will ask to take 10, 20 seconds just to introduce yourself, and then stay 50 minutes for each, and in the end, we might have time for discussion.
Can you just give me 1 second?
Please, okay, take your time. So we're going to have 4 presentations, okay? All the presentations about economics, different topics, different aspects. I'm quite sure that you're going to have very interesting moments here, discussion. Take your questions for the end, okay? We're going to go to these 4 presentations, and then if you have time, we might have a couple of minutes in the end to exchange a little bit about the topic of this panel. Stefano,
I can't find my presentation.
maybe what I could propose, we're going to take the Yeghia. So you might start now, and then we see if you can arrange this. So Yeghia, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. And Stefano, you try to.
It's done. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Yeghia Tashjian. I'm the Regional International Affairs Cluster Coordinator at the Issam Institute at the American University of Beirut. So the topic of my presentation actually is to be published in a book chapter at Routledge soon. It's about how Eurasian corridorization is shaping a multipolar order in South Caucasus. So maybe I will talk about the significance of economic corridors, and then briefly talk about the International North-South Corridor and the Belt and Road Initiative and their significance in the South Caucasus. And finally, to ask whether these 2 corridors are complementary or contradictory each other, depending from the perception of regional great powers, and also how this trade interconnectivity is facilitating multipolarity in the region. First, when it comes to corridorization, I mean, in academia and scholarly, we started realizing this word is repetitively used, especially given the decline of the US-led unipolar world order, the emergence of middle size and also great powers in Eurasia, but most importantly also after Russia's war against Ukraine in 2022 and Russia's pivot to the south and the east, basically, which facilitated a strong relation between China and Russia. When it comes, of course, another great power region is India. This is why we talk about the North-South corridor and how India is trying to make a comeback in the region, aiming to contain, of course, the Chinese interests. However, this corridorization is also trying to some extent limit the maneuvering space of small states, especially the South Caucasian, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. And eventually my argument is that these small states, they cannot continue maneuvering because eventually their maneuvering space will be limited and they have to bandwagon or choose other alliances to join. And this is also part of the realist perspective, the neorealism, which says that the objective of states is to survive. So basically these small states have to survive in a given the anarchic order of the international system. So first to talk about the significance of the International North-South Corridor and the Belt and Road Initiative in South Caucasus. So to promote regional interconnectivity, Russia, India, and Iran have launched the International North-South Corridor. To some extent, the main objective was actually to an alternative corridor to the Suez Canal. But from the Western perspective, this corridor is also being perceived as a sanction-proof supply chain. From the Russian perspective, I mean, based on some interviews with Russian experts and policymakers, the main objective before the fall of the Assad regime in Syria was to connect the Mediterranean to South Caucasus through Syria, Iraq, and Iran. But now this is not a feasible scenario anymore. So they want to preserve the North-South corridor, aiming also in the future to connect the East-West corridor and also maybe Turkey-initiated Middle corridor to the North-South corridor by controlling the trade routes in South Caucasus, mainly in Armenia. Now, this is also questionable whether Russia, they have the power to force this issue. From the Iranian perspective, of course, this is a geoeconomic significance because after the 2020 war between Armenia and Azerbaijan in Nagorno-Karabakh, the Iranians, they withdrew to some extent politically from the South Corridor. They became isolated, at least what the Iranians think. So they think that this corridor would also make a comeback for the Iranians in the region. For the Indians, of course, this is significant because it also is a reflection of the extended neighborhood policy for India. And from the Indian perspective, since the main objective is to contain the China in Central Asia, they are trying to convince the Americans to waive the sanctions on the Chabahar port in Iran. And this is a very interesting case that it is the only port in Iran where it is not sanctioned by the Americans. When it comes to China, China is very important. We all know about the Belt and Road Initiative. It was discussed during this conference many times. So the Chinese also are trying, there is a move to the west from the China. By west, I mean that is South Caucasus, Central Asia, and onward. And here, if we see the map, I mean, from the Chinese perspective, it's very important to cooperate with Turkey, Central Asia, and so forth, because it is the only feasible way to Europe is the middle corridor through Turkey. The northern corridor that passes through Russia is no more feasible because of the sanctions. The maritime route that passes through the Strait of Malacca is very dangerous and risky because you have the American Navy, you have the Indian influence, also you have the issue in the crisis in the Red Sea. So the only feasible, route is the middle corridor, and they have to find a common tongue or language with Turkey. So here also at the same time we're realizing that local states, which is Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, are trying to engage with China. First, if we talk about Azerbaijan, it plays important transit role, connecting the Caspian Sea to Caucasus mainland and through Georgia to the Black Sea. They have signed strategic partnership agreement with China. They are also viewing this as a diplomatic victory in order to contain the Western pressure when it comes to signing the peace deal with Yerevan. Georgia also plays important role when it comes to connecting the regions, and the Chinese are also investing in the Anakya port, and Georgia's foreign policy, to some extent, despite the criticism, it is very balancing, I can say, especially balancing between the East, China, to, let's say, Russia, also at the same time balancing between the West and the European Union and so forth. Then we have actually Armenia is in a very precarious situation. After the war, it became very vulnerable. It's trying to balance between the East and the West. It wants to integrate itself with the European Union, but just today the foreign minister said that they want to apply for the Schengen Cooperation Organization. So it's unclear where Armenia is lying, and also where China is within the context here. So now we have these two corridor projects, and whether they are complementary or contrary to each other. From Russia's perspective, actually, they are complementary because, as I said, Russia wants to bypass the Western sanctions. They want to have access to the Mediterranean, to the Persian Gulf, and so forth. It also falls within the context of integrating the Belt and Road Initiative in the Eurasian Economic Union. Iran also is very favorable in integrating these two corridors because Iran wants to diversify its economy, but we have now the problem of India. India is not in favor of integrating because India sees China's Belt and Road Initiative as a national security issue, threat to its sovereignty. Let's not forget, because the Belt and Road Initiative also through the China-Pakistan economic corridor. It passes through the Kashmir or the Pakistani-controlled area of Kashmir. This is very disputed region with India. So the Indians are blocking any initiative to connect these corridors. From China's perspective, of course, it is beneficial. The more there is business, the more the Chinese are very happy about it. So they want to expand. So this is now the problem. Despite the fact that the local and the regional actors, they view these two corridors as complementary, they are parallel, but we have the issue of India and China. So the only, like here, the argument what I'm making in my book chapter actually is that the BRICS, the Eurasian Economic Union, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization can play important role through dialogue and negotiations in order to try to converge the interests of the Indians and the Chinese in this corridor. Now, how this interconnectivity finally is facilitating multipolarity in the region? Small and weak states, to be very objectively within this anarchic order, they don't have very chance to survive. They have to take chances. Neutrality here is no option. You have giants, you have Russia, you have China, you have the USA. It's unclear foreign policy in the region, so they have to take chances. Azerbaijan, for now, until now, it's successfully capitalizing its position. However, amid the pressure, I mean, they have now tensions with the Russians, they have tensions with some the Europeans. They have to take sides in the future. We have Georgia again trying to balance, but despite the hopes of the Georgians to integrate in the Euro-Atlantic family, now we are seeing that the current Georgian government is moving a bit closer to China. Now we have, which is, like as I said, it is isolated from the regional trade routes. It has two borders blockaded by Turkey and Azerbaijan because of the Karabakh conflict. It has to be integrated in the regional system, but certain compromises, of course, should happen from both sides, Azerbaijan and Armenia, to open the border and so that Armenia can be integrated in the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative or in the Indian and Russian-led North-South corridor. So to conclude, I conclude with the following. Interconnectivity comes at the expense as corridors are used as geoeconomic instruments by great Eurasian powers to assert their influence on neighboring regions or countries. The corridorization of the South Caucasus has attracted the interest of regional and great powers to invest and pursue interconnectivity to advance their geoeconomic and geopolitical goals. The West will try to capitalize on such conflicts in order to prevent the integration of the South Caucasus into the Eurasian economic and political projects. Russia, aiming to maintain its position in the region, will deepen its interaction with China, Iran, and India to contain Western involvement in the South Caucasus. Armenia's strategic swing province is turning into global regional chessboard. Faced with difficult options, Armenia may eventually choose the regional integration path and increase its engagement with Russia and China. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the very interesting presentation about China and the corridors. I like always to talk about corridors. We hope we have discussion of the opportunity to discuss a little bit more in the end. And now I give the floor now to Wen-Chi, please. If you need to go to move to the computer. Thank you very much. 50 minutes.
There is no share button in here.
When you click on the let me click here. Yeah, that helps and here. Yeah.
Okay, I know, but which is resource? Okay.
I hope.
Okay, and then this. Yes, thank you.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Wen-Chi Yang. I am an associate professor at Department of Diplomacy at National Chengchi University in Taiwan. I'm very honored to present a research I co-authored with Professor Wenmin Lu. And our research is focused on the value chain of TSMC, and we specifically talk about the eco-efficiency and ESG performance of those companies, and how can they collectively pursue the net zero emissions. So semiconductors are the brains for modern technology, and they power everything from our smartphones to national defense systems. So we know that semiconductors are critical for enabling green technology. However, it's a very resource-intensive industry. So making chips consume a lot of energy and produce a lot of emissions. However, we know that AI demanding is increasing, so that means we need to get more chips, and also the emission will be increasing unless the chip makers take serious climate actions. So many chip makers already declared net zero goals, including TSMC. So our study offers data-driven insights for the ambition. Now, semiconductors nowadays are not only an economic asset, they are also a strategic resource for a country. So many countries understand the danger, the risks of relying on foreign chips. So they have tried to build fabs in their own countries to produce chips. However, due to the complexity of manufacturing semiconductors, the industry is still highly concentrated. So Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing company, TSMC, produces more than 50% of all the chips around the world. So TSMC is not only economically important, but also geopolitically important. And why is net zero important? We are seeing the impacts of climate change, like droughts, floods, wildfires. Not only the polar bears are distinguishing. Some Pacific Island countries, like Tuvalu, they will disappear because of sea level rise. So the United Nations already warned us that if we want to keep global warming to no more than the critical 1.5 Celsius degree, we need to cut our emissions by 45% by 2030. And we need to reach net zero by 2050. That means that we need to reduce our emissions as low as possible and to nasal emissions. And the remaining emissions should be removed by carbon capture or some other measures. And TSMC, many countries and cities and industries, companies, they all declared net zero goals. And TSMC also pledged to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. TSMC is very important in net zero emissions, not only because of its market size. It accounted for like 54% of total foundry revenue globally in 2020. And it also, as a multinational enterprise, it has a wide-reaching value chain. It has a huge upstream and downstream companies. So if TSMC can take the lead to do some like environmental practices, it will have a huge impact on the semiconductor industry. And it will also, but it cannot be it cannot be done by TSMC alone. So it has to work with its counterparts. And TSMC also established an ESG committee to play a key role in play a key role in TSMC's net zero plan. So traditionally, when investors try to find good companies to invest, they only look at financial performance. However, recently, more and more people concerned about the sustainability performance of companies. So ESG is like a scoreboard for companies in terms of their sustainability performance. There are several data sets which provides ESG scores rankings. And in our study, we use SEG ESG scores dataset. So in our study, we asked three research questions. The first one is how do the companies in TSMC's value chain perform in terms of eco-efficiency? And the second is how is the ESG rankings affect the firm performance of these companies? And the final question is how can we allocate the GHG emissions in order to achieve like some emission target without hurting the efficiency of the companies. And so the first stage, we use data envelopment analysis (DEA) to evaluate firms' performance. So DEA compares companies' performance in terms of how companies can use inputs to turn into the desirable outputs, such as net income and market value, at the same time minimize the CO2 emissions. So we proposed a new DA model instead of the old ones, because the old ones, the traditional DA model has some drawbacks. For example, it is a deterministic model. That means that that model doesn't take randomness or uncertainty in real life into consideration. And also the variables, the input-output variables can only be adjusted proportionally. So we propose a new model which called trans-constraint DA, which can adjust different variables independently. So we collect data from LSEG data stream, and we use 1 year data, which is 2020. So we collect all the variables in that data set, and then we compare the efficiency score. The efficiency score is from 0 to 1. So the higher the efficiency, the higher the number, the better the efficiency. So in our study, we find two meaningful results. The first is compared to the traditional DA model. The traditional DA model tends to overestimate the efficiency of the companies. So that's why we need to use a new model to estimate the efficiency of the companies. And also we compared the companies have different relationship with TSMC. And we find that the companies with supplier relationship with TSMC tend to have lower eco-efficiency. It's because that the suppliers means that they have to involved in production process, and that will make them consume a lot of energy and produce a lot of emissions. And we also compare the companies operate in different regions, and we find that companies in Asia has lower eco-efficiency because a lot of the companies in Asia, they have like supplier relationship. So that means they have to produce the chips, so make them tend to be lower. And the second stage, we use truncated regression to find out how the ESG score influence the eco-efficiency of the companies in the value chain. And instead of using an overall ESG score, we use 3 dimensions. Like we use environmental pillar score, social pillar score, and governance pillar score. And then we find that the environmental pillar score has a negative influence on companies' eco-efficiency. That is inconsistent with what we have talked about because and also because that the prior studies is on this issue is controversial. But we think that if we need to have higher environmental efficiency, we need to spend a lot of money to purchase like new cleaner technology, so that will bring the efficiency down. So that's why they have a negative relationship. So in the third stage, we use an inverse DA model to allocate the optimal efficiency emission amount for the companies, for the inefficient companies. So we stimulate 1% of the total emissions by the 53 sample companies in our study. And this is the result of the optimal reduction amount for each inefficient firms in TSMC's value chain. Although the number looks nice, however, there is a problem if we look closer because we can see that in this table, the inefficient company number 7 needs to reduce 99% of its emissions, and it's impossible in real life. So even if we use a more advanced model, we still encounter this kind of problem in real life. So we have those findings. And this paper has some contributions, like we expand the issue area. We talk about 3 things. And in terms of methodology, we proposed like new DA models to address our research questions. However, we also have some limitations like data availability. So we only have like 53 samples in our study out of like 150 companies. And we only use 1 year data as an illustration. But it cannot show the dynamics of the semiconductor industry. And there are some problems with the inverse DA model. So maybe we need to use another model to test its robustness. So in conclusion, the future of semiconductor industry will be shaped by 2 forces. One is the geopolitical tensions, and the other is the environmental imperatives. So because the environmental issue is really very, very important nowadays. And also achieving net zero is not a solo journey. So that's why we focus on the value chain, all the companies in TSMC, instead of talking about TSMC only. So thank you for your attention.
Wen-Chi Yang, thank you very much for your very complex presentation. Okay. And now we're going to jump to Aswini. and the topics are a little bit similar, okay? So we're going to talk about semiconductors. Please, the floor is yours.
This is the presentation.
Okay.
Is this yours?
No, mine is PDF.
Which one?
On top. The first, yeah.
Who is gonna share?
Oh, wait a minute. Go to the first page. Yeah. Sure. Share the window.
Sure, yeah.
Share the window. Yes.
Sure.
Share the window. It was okay. It was okay. Great. Okay, that's great. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to present. It's really a great pleasure to be with here. Okay, so actually my presentation is kind of a follow-up with Professor Wen-Chi presentation. So basically, during the presentation, she mentioned some key points. Look, I kind of feel like I skipped the introduction because she already elucidated the main importance of semiconductor industry, particularly how the TSMC plays an important role in the particularly the semiconductor supply chain and all. So I don't want to continue with I don't want to repeat the same thing. So I'll just continue with 2 points. When she mentioned that initially she mentioned that because of the AI demand, TSMC plays an important role because it is only few countries in the world could produce most advanced chips. Right now it's like 3 nanometer and in future 2 nanometer. So only TSMC and Samsung, these two countries kind of dominating the entire supply chain, and almost like 92% of the advanced chips is actually manufactured by TSMC. So the problem we can see that during a presentation she mentioned the future of semiconductor relies on two factors, which is she mentioned that environmental issues and geopolitical issues. So she already mentioned the environmental issues. So I kind of follow up from the geopolitical aspect. So when we see this, we could see that how vulnerable TSMC, like Taiwan have this tremendous development through this semiconductor industry, but that kind of it's more like a double-edged sword, because on the one hand it kinds of gave more strategic importance for the Taiwan island, but on the other hand it also create a vulnerability. So we already know that how important it is in the location, in aspect of the geostrategic location. So that what my my study is trying to propose is that Taiwan can look behind the traditional partners and then try to look more into creating new partner, or else strengthening the relationship with already existing partner. So before moving on to the next slide, I'll just briefly explain. So when we see in the last few years, particularly last 5 years, there is a tremendous strong strengthening of relationship between Taiwan and Southeast Asian country, and also particularly with India. Why? Is because Taiwan introduced the New Southbound policy, which mainly focus on not only relying on its traditional allies, but also try to diversify their geopolitical allies. With particularly India plays an important role in that national policies. So my topic, I kind of give the brief introduction about the geopolitical aspect. So from here, what I'm trying to present is that how this Taiwan semiconductor industry could give a prospect lessons for India's semiconductor industry. Because in December 2021, India started to realize how important the semiconductor industry for Indian economy, because almost entire chip is produced by outside, and India is actually importing that. So that during the mainly two issues: the COVID pandemic and then the US-China tech competition kind of created a space to think how important it is for the economy of India. So they started to implement policies, and they established this India Semiconductor Missions to start producing chips in there. And when we see, like the first question comes to our mind is that, so what is the position of India in the semiconductor value chain? Do they produce the chips? Like I said, they don't. Then what is the actual position in the semiconductor industry? Because when we talk about semiconductor industry, we kind of know about Taiwan, Japan, Korea, China, US. But what about India? So actually, if we see, India is actually playing an important role in the when it comes to the design of chip. Almost 20% of the semiconductor chips is actually designed in India. And most of the US designing company, they have a presence in India. So that is the most important thing. But then India realized that design alone would not give strategic importance to India. So they started to make policies to incorporate India into the manufacturing aspect as well. So that is kind of a brief introduction to the story, why India want to take a position in this value chain. So from this, so my paper particularly focused on how Taiwan throughout the history evolved in this semiconductor industry. So that from my study, this study is actually fully qualitative and case study. So I don't have much data in here. I just try to see the continuation evolution throughout the history. So first thing that India can learn from Taiwan is that when Indian strategic circle, when they see how the Taiwan evolved through this from the agriculture sector to the advanced sector, there are certain key factors that could play important role for India. It could provide a lesson for India. First thing is that government plays the venture risk capitalist, because sometimes when it comes to the economy, market plays an important role. That's we know about in the international political economy aspect. But when it comes to Taiwan did a really great job. Taiwan government during 1970s, when they started to develop from the agriculture to advanced technology, they specifically chose semiconductor industry, and then they government played an important role, and they established a particular unit for overarching all this in establishing semiconductor industry and facilitating between the companies and all. So the Ministry of Economic Affairs implemented a strategic approach to help the Taiwanese company. So they basically try to provide facilitate companies, foreign companies, and also like how to transfer technology to Taiwan soil. So there's a full strategy that Taiwan implemented. First one is reverse brain drain, and then focus on manufacturing and strategic partnership, and then government support. These are the four main strategy that Taiwan started when they initiated this, try to develop the semiconductor industry. So reverse brain drain, the Taiwan realized that the many of the Taiwanese engineers working in US, they can incentivize them to bring back to the land, and then establish the semiconductor industry. That kind of create a big revolution for the next point, which is focusing on the manufacturing sector. So that what happened in many of us know about in the history. So the important player in this aspect is Maurice Chong. He was the chairman of the TSMC, and he is the founding father of the independent foundry model. So what he basically did is that during that time, many companies are focusing on IDM, integrated device manufacturing. So he just decided that he kind of proposed a novel model of pure foundry model. That means that the company will not design anything and will not sell the chip under the name. So it's basically manufactured for someone else. So that kind of a model create a big revolution in the semiconductor industry. Why is so? Because of that, many of the company, they don't have to focus on the very capital expensive industry on producing microchips, semiconductors. So they focus mainly on designing, so that it kind of create a space for more innovation. So that during that time, many fabless company arose. And there was like a big lesson for India, because like India already have a strong hold in the design aspect. So that then they wanted to focus on manufacturing as well. They could learn this how they can make use of the already Indian engineers working in TSMC or working in some other semiconductor industry, and then bring them back to the soil and then focus on manufacturing, and which India already have strong design capabilities, so they can focus on creating semiconductor chips. And also one other thing is that when Taiwan started, they want to focus on creating more advanced chips, but India can focus more on what is needed in the domestic market, and also India can focus more on how it can create a global level participate in the value chain and then create the world standard chips instead of focusing too much on upgrading into the 3 nanometer, 2 nanometer. They can stick with 28 nanometer and 14 nanometer and focus on vertically focus on that. That is a good lesson they can learn. And also the important fourth point is the government support, which India is already in the right track to support the semiconductor industry. They are providing a lot of incentive, and they initiated the Indian Semiconductor Mission and incentivize the private companies to partnership with other companies, and then they provide a lot of incentive that is already in a good track. And yeah, this one I already mentioned, and this how important TSMC professor mentioned before. So I just skip this. So but when we see that, so what? So is it easy to make semiconductor in anywhere? It is really not, because making a semiconductor, it really involves a lot of problems. But one of the big problem that India faces is the infrastructure challenges, because semiconductor need mainly power and water. But India is already having a lot of domestic issues facing this problem, so they need to focus on that. And then also but since it's already in the right track in future, but making a semiconductor industry in the soil, it takes some years. It just doesn't work in 5 years. Within 5 years, it takes at least minimum 10 years to set up everything, so that India can focus on long-term investment and long-term strategy, how to sustain that, not just like one-time capital investment and then leave the rest to outside. No, the government should, throughout the process, they should support the industry, and they have to take a more proactive roles into that. And also they can focus on the design strength, which India is already good with. So finally, what my conclusion I would like to say is that strategic partnership is the most important thing that India can have. So instead of repeating the same manufacturing supply chain, they can partnership with Taiwan and some other partner who already had matured nodes and legacy chips, so that they can learn from that. They can partnership with others. So India have a self-sufficiency plan and everything. Self-sufficiency doesn't mean that we have to do everything alone, have to do everything like isolated and do everything alone. Partnership matters the most. And then the three things that India can focus is that build on the design excellence, which they already have strong hold in, and then the strong strategic partnership and long-term vision. Like normally we walk first and then run. So if you want to fly, you should start from the basic. You cannot just jump directly. So it's like a step-by-step process. You need to have a decade-long commitment, and then policy stability. That's one of the biggest challenge for India, because when Taiwan started this journey, they have a solid central power, but India is like a democracy power, but government is doing a good job in continuing this. So these are the three things that India can focus on. And thank you so much and I really welcome more questions from you. Thank you.
Shuni, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation about India. Now I pass the floor, and this is going to be our last communication from the panel. Last but not least, Stefano, please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Can you help me open the? Okay. Yeah. 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 We need to open it close here. Now share. Share. Okay, so we made it. The technology is solved. Thank you very much. So good afternoon to everyone. I would like to thank everyone for this very interesting conference, the organizing committee, and also every speaker that shared very interesting insights. So I will also talk about trade diplomacy and commercial corridors. And I'm here to present my ongoing research project, which focuses on the resurgence of trade diplomacy, and specifically the renewed interest by state actors in the constructions of such corridors. Great. So basically, corridors today, they are not just trade routes, they are tools of strategic influence. And of course, this is not a new phenomenon. Trade routes have historically served as channels for not just goods, but ideas, religions, and also cultures. And today, this logic is resurfacing in a modern way, which is basically what we're witnessing is that nations are making vast investments in ports, railways, pipelines, and highways. And they're not used simply as infrastructures, but they are seen as strategic tools for influence and diplomacy. And what is particularly interesting for me is that the current wave of corridor diplomacy is not being led by traditional powers, but rather by emerging powers. And this is thanks to the more fragmented geopolitical landscape in which we live in which some specific actors, they exploit what is being called strategic ambiguity, and they position themselves between camps, leveraging partnership that allow them to avoid full alignment and challenging in this way the standard conception of the global order. And this brings me to the core of my research, and I try to address this phenomenon looking at by the theoretical lens of international political economy, drawing particularly from Richard Rosecrans' rethinking of state power in the 1980s. And basically what Rosecrans provides is an historical rethinking of state power, arguing that modern states have shifted their focus from territorial conquest to the control and expansion of trade networks, where economic interdependence is basically elevates commerce to become a central pillar of national security strategies. And I believe that corridor represent a new arena for this kind of competition, because trade as a means of diplomatic influence and national emancipation has become the core of emerging power strategies to carve out a role in today's increasingly multipolar order. So when we talk about corridors, we all are accustomed with the golden standard, which is the China's Belt and Road Initiative. And since its launch in 2013, China has signed agreements with over 150 countries. And the project has served China's interest not merely as an economic development project, but also as a strategic tool for extending Beijing geopolitical influence beyond its regional borders. And the scope and dimension and also the impact that the BRI had makes it a cornerstone against which all other modern corridor projects can be compared. So there is a debate on Belt and Road Initiative. Its record is mixed because on the one side we can say that it has transformed connectivity across Asia and also Africa, but it has also triggered debt crisis in some countries. It has a strained local governance system across other regions, and it has also sparked allegations of a neo-colonial approach targeting Beijing, which is exactly the opposite of the Chinese official narrative regarding the project. So there is a debate within the academia, and of course this debate is also affecting global politics at a political level. But and the question is is the Belt and Road Initiative being successful? And by successful, I mean, has it tilted the global economy toward China, like in China's favor? This is still an open question, but what we can say for sure is that the Belt and Road Initiative has attracted the interest and, more importantly, the reaction of most of Beijing counterparts, regardless of their global positioning. And when I mean the reaction, I'm talking about the alternative corridors that are emerging on the global trade scene. You can see in this map the blue arrows. They refer to the so-called IMEC, and the orange arrows that go through Iraq and Turkey is the so-called Turkey-Iraq Development Road Project. So on this side, we can say that that the BRI has been successful because what it has done, it has redefined how corridors are used as tools of influence and has motivated other actors to respond in kind. And so if we look at IMEC, we see that there are some tendencies that repropose themselves. IMEC was announced in 2023, and it aims to link India to Europe via the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel. And the main point of IMEC, its like strategic relevance, is that the corridor aims to cut transport time by 40% compared to maritime routes like the Suez Canal. But I'm interested at looking at corridor from the perspective of their launching state. So if we look at India, we can say that by launching itself in the design of this mega infrastructural project that encompasses 3 continents and requires substantial investments, New Delhi aims to position itself as a new center of gravity within an increasing multipolar world. India wants to project itself on its immediate neighborhood and beyond its region. And in order to do this, what Delhi is trying to do is to maximize the 2 guidelines that steer its strategic positioning policy, which are basically, again, non-alignment in the global arena and countering China expansionism in the Indo-Pacific. But India's shift also impacts other actors, and in particular the West, because what the West increasingly views India as a reliable partner for the friendshoring activities. So India is becoming a mean of diversifying supply chains away from China. And also IMEC allows the connection of the economic hubs of Europe and Asia, as well as all those regional cooperation initiatives which have been either encouraged or guided by the US. And this includes, for example, the 3 Seas initiative, the Greece-Israel-Cyprus cooperation in Eastern Mediterranean, and the E2U2, which is India, Israel, United States, United Arab Emirates Forum, which operates in economic and military domains. But engaging in corridor diplomacy implies gaining a direct and often undesired stake in multiple political crises. And indeed, IMEC faces considerable geopolitical risk because it traverses very volatile region. And just to make an example, the endpoint, which is Israel's Haifa port, is the link between the Gulf and Europe. And of course, this means going through a country that is actually waging conflicts. And on the other side, the success of IMEC depends on the normalization of bilateral relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia, again, amid the ongoing war in Gaza. Then we also have a financial issue because the high cost of this new infrastructure, and I can mention the ports that are being built on Indian western coast or the rail links in the Gulf, they require stable investment environments, and these are very hard to guarantee under regional instability. So in short, we can say IMEC ambition is real, but its feasibility is deeply shaped by the surrounding geopolitical climates. If we look at Turkey-Iraq development roads, again, the corridor actually took a new relevance following the announcement of IMEC, because Turkey's position on IMEC has never been warm. President Erdogan, he declared that without Turkey there is no corridor because IMEC precisely cut off Turkey from the global supply routes. And indeed, Ankara perceives IMEC as a direct challenge to its historical role as a vital hub for goods transport between Europe and Asia. So in response to this, the Turkish government launched, together with Iraq, the Development Road Project, which is the former Dry Canal, which consists in a 1,200-kilometer network of railways and highways linking the Persian Gulf to Europe via Iraq and Turkey. And if we look at Turkey's rationale behind this, we see that it goes above commerce, because, on the one side, the development road wants to reinforce the Turkish Middle Corridor vision and thus reclaiming transit centrality amid IMEC and the BRI competition. But also Turkey aims to leverage the economic benefits that will derive from the initiative to further strengthen its influence over its southern neighbors, and this means especially the Iraqi Kurdistan and the broader Levant, which following the fall of the Assad regime has actually seen a strong increase in Turkish influence. And then there is also an energy security dimension, because the corridor would reduce the risk for energy goods, because it would grant overland access from the Gulf to Europe bypassing the Strait of Hormuz. Even for this corridor, of course, there are very pressing risk, which basically are security risk, because the corridor passes through volatile areas in which we have IS remnants. There is the still unsolved issues of Kurdish guerrilla fighters in the north of Iraq and pro-Iranian militias that still operate in the country, which are going to add to insurance and construction cost for the new infrastructure. Then we have logistical bottlenecks between Baghdad and Erbil government within Iraq, because they still lack coordination among customs, land acquisition, and governance. And it's all before the project starts to be built. And then we have a financial issue, because both Turkish and Iraqi economy, they are facing very dire pressure. And though we have actually Gulf investors active in the project, sustained finance is far from guaranteed. So again, we can say that the development road has a very strong geostrategic logic, but it's fragile from an economic and security perspective. So I'm gonna jump to my conclusion. Basically, another relevant point when we talk about economic corridors is that we still shouldn't see them only framed as national ambitions, because they are embedded within a broader global interest, and especially for what concerns IMEC, the United States and the European Union, they clearly see it as a mean to counterbalance China and reduce their dependency on global supply chains. And the redundancy of trade routes is actually a very good news for Western actors, because the development of competing large-scale initiatives means that the risks are spread across different regions, and this reduces the leverage of economic coercion and trade unfair practices. Also, we see that Gulf countries are investing in actually both projects, because they also want to diversify logistics beyond the Strait of Hormuz. And this would like secure new trade lanes. So the end point is that this external interest in the development of this project, they show how multipolarity is fueling new partnership, but also that the sustainability of these corridors actually depends on more than just geography. It depends on politics, it depends on finance, and it also really depends on the narrative behind it that sustain these corridors. So to conclude, the main point is that trade diplomacy is back, and it's not a marginal activity. It's a central mode of geoeconomic competition. And also, the interesting element is that those that are leading the charge are emerging powers, which they seek to gain influence and autonomy by redesigning the global trade map. But this project actually comes with real constraints, which I've mentioned: governance bottlenecks, financial fragility, and regional instability. So the core question that remains unanswered and can also be a focus for further research is, can emerging powers turn corridor diplomacy from an aspiration into a sustained advantage? Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, Stefano, thank you very much for very interesting discussion about diplomatic corridors and trade diplomacy, which makes, of course, sense in our days. We have a couple of minutes now, and I'm going to open the floor for debate. So those are here. If you want to take the floor or if you want to make some comments, please raise your hand. Or yes, I think I can give you this. Okay, please. If you mind, just give your name, please.
Thank you very much. It was one of the most interesting sessions with everyone from all over the world, covering almost the whole world. So my question will be to Ms. Yang and Ms. Kumar together. First question. You saw from the same topic from different angles. What about what you call the regional powers thinking from your angle about Taiwan's role, or let's say domination over the production? Okay, how you see from your side, how you see from India's side? And my second question will be to Stefano. I promised to ask him a question because I see as your presentation show that like the new alternative corridors seem to be like you open two shops or two branches of the same brand, and then you try to break the hegemony of a big company of hundreds of branches. So what do you think that this new corridors, how can they overcome, or was it possible? Because the most important, I guess, the issue is that ethnic and religious conflicts in the region that increases the expenses of the corridors. Do you see any picture on that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other question on the room, please?
Yeah. So one common theme across this whole panel was looking at a certain element of geopolitical risk, whether it's with transport corridors or with semiconductors. My question is basically, I leave it open to anyone who wants to answer it, not specifically to either of them. Where do you see a certain element of geopolitical risk? How much is the percentage, if you can roughly tell me, within each of the components? So suppose if we look at the infrastructure aspect of it, it relies very heavily on, let's say, a country like India having positive relations with Israel, with Iran, with Saudi Arabia, right? That is a probability, it will exist, but there is no certainty that it will sustain for a long time, because geopolitics will fracture that over a point of time, because eventually you have to choose sides. You cannot be non-aligned all the time, right? So how much of this can be factored in, and at what point do you see that geopolitical ability of one country to hold this particular system in place breaking apart? Do you have a certain indicator by which we can understand that? Because that would add the greatest value in terms of this particular thing.
Thank you very much. We're going to take now one question from Zoom. Mr. Dr. Plumberg, the question is about Iran, about the situation, how this can be mind-changing or something that's going to affect these corridors. So what I'm going to do, we're going to give 3 minutes for each of you to get some answers to these questions. And I will start with you, Wen-Chi Yang, please.
To address the question of the regional dominance of the semiconductor industry, I think most countries are worried about TSMC dominant the semiconductor, because it's important to every country, but because of the cross-strait tensions. So, how do you say? Because we always kidding that Taiwan's experience is not so cannot be reproduced in other places, because our engineers are very devoted, so they will work like 24 hours without complaining. So even if that TSMC, under the pressure of Donald Trump, so it has to invest in the United States, we think that it's very impossible for it to reproduce the experience in the United States. Yeah.
Yeghia, please.
Yeah. Regarding the Iran, definitely, because if the war was going to be prolonged, so Iran plays very important role both on the INSTC, the North-South Corridor, and the Belt and Road Initiative. This is why I think that behind what was spoken behind the media, there were back channels between the Russians and the Chinese. And let's not forget that sometimes we mock Medvedev, but he made a tweet about nuclear weapons. He said that if the Iranians want nuclear weapons, we can give them. And I think this is a signal for the Americans that, look, Iran is existential for Russia. I mean, like, the only oxygen route for Russia to the outside world is the Caucasus and the Iran to the Persian Gulf. So I remember, because when I was in St. Petersburg 2 years ago, and we were discussing it with the Russian office, they said for us, the North-South Corridor is existential. It's a red line, because without it, the Russians cannot trade with the outside world. So for them, it's important. Also for China, because the whole concept of the Belt and Road Initiative and the moving to the west passes through Central Asia and Iran, so they cannot afford. And also the Persian Gulf, I mean, the energy security, it's very important for them. When it comes to India is playing two sides. They have the IMEC and the INSTC. The problem is that the members of both these projects are contradictory to each other. I mean, the INSTC, India, Iran, Russia, and the IMEC is US, pushed a project connecting India, the Persian Gulf, to Israel, which is also a reflection of the Abraham Accord and the normalization and so forth. And we have a conflict in both projects. Iran is being bombed and Israel is being bombed. Good that there is somehow a ceasefire, though I believe that the first round of the war has ended. We don't know when the second round will happen, hopefully not with nuclear weapons, but they are not promising. So it seems that in the future, if war or something conflict prolongs, India has to deal with China to come up with a compromise to merge the North-South with the Belt and Road Initiative.
Thank you. Aswini, your comments, please.
Okay. Oh, thank you so much for these two questions. It's really like eye-opening. So to answer I agree with Professor Wen-Chi, and it is true that TSMC's system cannot be like Taiwan's semiconductor system cannot be replicated in any other country. Main reason is that the climate, the time zone is totally different. It's very difficult to replicate in any other country. But when it comes to the Taiwan's role of dominance, how the regional powers see this is like, actually when we see it, I think besides South Korea, none of the other countries see Taiwan's role or dominant role in semiconductor industry as a big competitive power, because this Taiwan's position is actually, it doesn't create like a threat to other countries in the region. It creates more like a symbiotic relationship, because they could leverage Taiwan's position in the semiconductor industry to develop the economy. Because if you see in Southeast Asia, many of the like Malaysia, Singapore, many of them, they don't focus on manufacturing. They do have some companies, but they focus on the different aspect of the supply chain. They mainly focus on the assembly and offset, and they focus on packaging and all. So how I'm talking particularly from the international political economic aspect. So how they see Taiwan's position is, it's more likely it's like a network of relationship. They see Taiwan as a hub, so they can use Taiwan as a hub to connect with different spoke. So Taiwan is like it gives an opportunity for other country to have more strategic partnership, particularly in terms of technology with other countries. So it kind of open up a partnership with other countries. So many regional powers in Southeast Asia and East Asia see Taiwan's dominance as an opportunity. And also this US-China tech competition create more opportunity for the regional powers to closely together to like strengthen their own capability in the supply chain. And also if we see that, we already know Taiwan is already have a stronghold, so that each and every country is trying to see how they can leverage Taiwan's position instead of how they can like fight against. So they are trying to see how they can leverage in any aspect. Because the thing when it comes to the semiconductor industry is that not one single country, even the US, cannot make the entire chip, like starting from the design till the end product. It cannot do, because it involves it's like a pyramid. It involves so many steps. So it doesn't have raw materials. It needs to export raw materials from China or Japan or some other, and they don't have a machine to EUV lithography machine to make. They have to export from European partners. Like they have to export from the Dutch company, Issam and all. And also they cannot get the pure silicon, because to make the semiconductor we need silicon. So they import this from Japan, because Japan plays important roles in the chemical industry. So you see that there are certain countries which plays a dominant role. So it also connected with geopolitics, because raw materials cannot be extracted from anywhere. It has to here it comes to geopolitical aspect as well. So this answer my second question. You asked a question about when you see the element. I feel like currently we can look geopolitics and technology as like a one like a dichotomy of one system, because it's very tightly related to each other. It's actually the world is moving towards the geopolitical like technopolar world, because the country which dominates technology can yield the power. So we see this in many, like in Ukraine war, we can see that how the unarmed drones play an important role fighting against the Russian army. So that we could clearly see that technology plays an important role. So in conclusion, technology used to be traditional, used to be like an economic aspect. Let the companies do, let the market decide. Everything is like according to private actors. But now, with the current geopolitical current dynamics, it is mostly interrelated with each other. So it's actually a techno-geopolitical war, and the world is more like the techno-polarity world. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefano.
Okay, thank you very much for your question. Yes, the end point of your question was, is there any future? I think yes, because there is a need. The need comes mainly if we see these corridors as on the one side you have these emerging powers who want to challenge autonomy, but at the end point of the corridors you have Western powers who want to get detached from what they define hostile powers control over their supply chains. And I think the war in Ukraine was a wake up, because Europe basically found itself dependent on Russian oil, and they understood that dependency from hostile actors is a leverage that China and Russia, they can use whenever they want. So I think this is the development of what happened following the Ukrainian war. People in Western governments, they realize that they need to detach themselves from China, so the control over supply chains. And this is one point. The other point is that in the age of interdependence, of global economic interdependence, trade is much more relevant than what we think. Even if we're going through a phase of militarization, trade still maintains a huge role. And this is clearly seen by Trump. I mean, all he's doing is basically focused on trade. Then I'm not gonna go into like the effectiveness of what he's doing, but like trade as a main and central role. And also another example is following Israel's attack on Iran. You know, the first thing that everyone said was like, is the Strait of Hormuz gonna be closed? The Iranians cannot close it because their economy depends on shipping oil to China. So if they close the Strait of Iran, they're Hormuz, they're gonna shatter down their entire economy. So these choke points are strategic for everyone, not only for those that can pose a menace to them. Then there is a question, I think, on more than if there is any future, is the question should be, will this emerging power actually increase their role in the global economy through their corridors, or they will simply be part of a larger scheme? And I think this will very much depend on themselves. And I'm talking about India and Turkey in this case, because this is what I was focusing on. India, with IMEC, has mainly made the first step forward, leaping away from strategic neutrality. But this means having a say in a lot of issues that they always refrain from doing. And so if they don't take a clear stance on a lot of issues, they will not have, let's say, a return on investment on IMEC as well. So this means taking a stronger stance on Israel war in Gaza. It means that their strategic neutrality vis-a-vis Russia might be questioned in the future, because if you become the starting point of a major trade link with the West, with NATO and Europe, and an entire number of actors that are clearly positioned in some way vis-a-vis Russia, you cannot be strategic neutral with respect to Russia forever. And also, for example, these corridors, you see their impact also in the latest Pakistani-India conflict, because the Belt and Road Initiative, there is the China-Pakistan corridor that is located just next behind Kashmir. So you cannot solve Kashmir without China having a say. So I think it will very much depend, the role of this emerging power will very much depend on themselves and on their willingness to challenge the specific, let's say, relations of power. And for example, one of the issues which is not being addressed yet is, in the past, for example, if you take the British Empire, the way they secured their dominance over trade corridors was through military forces. So the merchant navy was followed by from like the military. So will India and Turkey exploit their military power to secure the specific outpost? Well, Turkey is doing this in the north of Iraq, and this is probably gonna, if we look at the feasibility of the Iraqi road development project, Turkish military outposts in the north of Iraq are probably going to play a very important role in this, because the Turkish military can actually guarantee the security of the infrastructure that are going to be built. With respect to India, of course, this is like a more complex scenario, but I hope I answered your questions. Thank you.
Stefano, thank you very much. We're coming to a end. This very interesting panel, diplomatic corridors, trade diplomacy, Belt and Road Initiative, the place of China, India, Taiwan in this geo-economical world. It was a very global panel. So thank you very much for everybody. Thank you very much for the questions. And please join me in a round of applause to our speakers for today. Thank you very much.